Be sure you download the note card that goes along with this sermon, and you can print it out and you can follow along, fill it in as you follow the sermon. If you like this sermon, want to see more like this, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, also hit the bell notification so you'll be notified when other new content is added to this site. We try to add sermons as often as we can. We'll try to add some Bible question and answers that we've done before in the past, other things we may be adding to this. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to follow us on social media, there are links to our social media accounts in the video description below. Now, let's jump into the sermon.
Welcome to the second lesson in our study of the book of Joshua. Joshua thought to be written in 1375 BC. Time period thought to cover some think 1400 to 1375, depends on who you look at as what say. The book is named after Joshua, who is installed as the leader of Israel after Moses' death. It recounts how the Israelites obtained the promised land, starting at the crossing of the Jordan River. Starting at the crossing of the Jordan River and the 7-year battle to take the Canaan land, the promised land. Chapters 1 through 5, we see in chapter 1 particularly, spies enter Jericho. We have that happen. And then we have the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River to enter the promised land to begin the conquest. Joshua himself is from the tribe of Ephraim. He served as Moses' aide since his youth, according to Numbers chapter 11, verse 28, and chapter 13, verse 8. There were multiple points in the Torah, that is, the 5 preceding books of the Bible, when Israel turned away from their God and Moses, but Joshua was completely loyal to both. Joshua was not involved when Israel turned away to worship a golden calf. Furthermore, when Moses sent Joshua and the 11 other spies into the promised land ahead of the people, Joshua was one of the only spies who believed that Israel's God could help them seize the land. Numbers 14, verses 6 through 9. At the end of Moses' life, God chose Joshua to lead the nation into the promised land. The time period we're covering today is this preparation and the crossing of the Jordan River. Chapters 3, 4, and 5. The time they were on the east side of the Jordan River was approximately a month, maybe 2, some have thought. It's going to take them 7 years to complete the conquest of the land, and they're not going to conquer all the land. There's going to be some they leave, and that is going to be a thorn in their side. We're going to learn that when we get to the book of Judges and the issues that causes. An overview, a little more overview of Joshua and what we have seen thus far in our study. Of course, we've studied Abraham in Genesis being the father of the Israelite nation. And in the nation of Israel, Moses leads them in the wilderness. Mount Sinai, they received the 10 Commandments. And in the wilderness, they wander because of disobedience not to go into the land, for not believing they could take the land. So now they are on the east side. That picture is actually backwards there. But they're on the east side to go into the promised land at a place called Shittim. That's where they're located. Chapters 1 through 5. Joshua is the new Moses. He tells them to obey the commands of the Torah. He sends 2 spies to go and spy out the land, to spy out Jericho. And then they come back And of course, Rahab has hidden them. She wants her family saved. She's concerned about her family, so they tell her to put the red cord in her window and they will save her when they take Jericho. Chapters 3 and 4, the Lord leads Israel into the promised land. They cross the Jordan on dry land. Chapter 5, we're introduced to the angel of the Lord, or the commander of the Lord's host, which would be Christ in the Old Testament. We'll talk about why in a few minutes. We'll also see that they're going to circumcise this generation. They're going to observe the Passover again for the first time in our lesson today. Another overview, Joshua 1 through 5, we're in the preparation, the calling and responsibility of godly leaders. Chapters 6 through 12, conquering the implementation of God's strategy for victory. Chapters 13 through 24, dividing of the land, the accountability to complete God's mission. Still some stuff for the people to do. And how they do that is how it's going to determine how peaceful they are in the land. When we look at and do an overview of the land of Canaan prior to the conquest, these nations are listed in Joshua. The Amalekites, Philistines, Canaanites, Hittites, Jebusites, Hivites, Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites are all in possession of this land. We remember God had told them not to contend with the Edomites because they were not to be given the Edomites' land. That land belonged to Edom. That was theirs forever. So they did not as they come up through. An idea of the terrain that they're going to be facing as they conquer these nations that are in the land of Canaan, the promised land. Here they are, showing the topographical layout, the mountainous country, Jordan Valley, the hill country. Oh, what treacherous land they have to deal with. Here's the order of the conquest. They've come up from Kermob. They've come to Mount Nebo that Moses went up to and saw all the way into the promised land, saw all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, but was not allowed to go in his lifetime. Of course, we learned he does go in. Matthew 17, Mount of Transfiguration. And so there's the conquest. There's the conquest. Once again, here it is, entry into Canaan, central and southern conquest. And then they're going to go northward. They're going to have a northern conquest as well. The southern conquest we'll be looking at maybe next week. We'll start into it actually next week. And so chapters 1 through 5, developing God's people. The calling and responsibility of godly leaders, preparing. You need to prepare for leadership. You don't just assume leadership without preparing for leadership. Joshua chapter 3 through 5, we have Israel crossing the Jordan. Joshua chapter 3, signs and wonders. We see the signs and wonders involved in their crossing of the Jordan River. Joshua chapter 3. They're going to begin by receiving instructions for the crossing. Always when you get ready to do something you haven't done before, you need instructions from someone to know how you are going to go about accomplishing the task. A lot of times that's what school's for. You get to make your mistakes in school, and that way you don't make them on the job. So we see the location of Shittim on this map. We see the possible crossing. We see Gilgal and we see Jericho, the first two places involved. Moses rose up early in the morning. They set out from Shittim. And they came to Jordan, he and all the people, and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, they were there 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go. For you have not passed this way before. It's an unfamiliar way, so you're going to have to depend on those bearing the ark to lead the way that you need to cross. You may have to zig, you may have to zag. They zigzag, you're going to zigzag. Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourself. Now, not make yourself constipated, but consecrate yourself. Had a guy sing that song, Consecrated Lord to Thee. He always sang Constipated Lord to Thee. I couldn't keep from laughing. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but it was just the way it was. I don't know if he didn't realize it or he just didn't know how to pronounce the word, but it's consecrate. There's a difference here. I guess you can be stopped up for the Lord, but anyway. For tomorrow, the Lord will do wonders among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant, went before the people. Now the Lord is going to exalt Joshua before the people. Verse 7, the Lord says, today I will exalt you. So we have the exaltation of Joshua. People then receive instructions from Joshua. It says, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. Here's the exaltation. God has told Joshua the words. Joshua passes them to the people there. They have already said they didn't want to hear the voice of the Lord anyway. They scared the bejeebies out of them at Mount Sinai. So you talk for us. Joshua said, here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgasites, Amorites, and the Jebusites. There they are. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man, and when the sole of the feet of the priest bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, the feet of the priest bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, and now the Jordan overflows. The Jordan was at its highest level. It had overflowed its bank for the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose in a heap as far as Adam. We'll see that in a minute on the map. And we learned that it's beside Zarethan. Those flowing down toward the Sea of Arba, the Salt Sea, were firmly completely cut off. The people passed over opposite Jericho. The priest bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all of Israel passed over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. So the people crossed the Jordan River. This is kind of a map that'll show us where we think the crossing site is. There's Shittim, kind of directly across from Jericho, about the same distance on the other side from Jericho, it looks like to me. So with that, chapter 4, we have the story of the memorial stones. Our memorials are usually pictures we take of areas, and we used to keep them on in our scrapbooks and our photo albums, but today we have our iPhones and Androids, and we can just fill those things up with photographs and wonder, how in the world am I going to get all these photographs off here? There's no developing a film. There's no waiting for weeks for those pictures to come and be surprised when we get the pictures and see how some of them are out of focus, some of them didn't show up, some of them didn't get copied, but we don't have that problem with the iPhone and the Android today. When all the nations had finished crossing over, chapter 4, verse 1, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet firmly stand. Bring them over with you and lay them down at the place where you will lodge tonight. Of course, that's going to be Gilgal. Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulders. Now, this gives us an idea of how heavy these stones are. According to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall tell them, the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and when it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so that these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. The people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded. Took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the lodge, according to the number of the tribes. And the people of Israel, verse 8, did just as Joshua commanded, took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the numbers of the tribe of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged and laid them down there. Joshua set up the 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day, this writer says. For the priest bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And then we have a statement that the people passed over in haste. They didn't just take their sweet time getting over. They hurried and got over. So these memorial stones we have. So we see the people passed over. When all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priest passed over before the people. Sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh, passed over armed before the people of the Lord as Moses had told them. They said, yeah, you can have this land on the east side of the Jordan, but you must go to the west to help them have peace as well. About 40,000. Ready for war passed over before the Lord for battle through the plains of Jericho. And that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. The Lord said to Joshua, command the priest bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priest come up out of the Jordan, and with the priest bearing the ark of the covenant, the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan. Soles of the priest's feet were lifted up on dry ground. The waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. So now the banks have overflowed. The people came up out of the Jordan, verse 19, on the 10th day of the first month. They encamped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And so the east side they got to. And those 12 stones, which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So here it is once again. Shittim, they cross. There's Adam, where the waters were backed up at, and all down through there was no water flow, dry ground, all through. And so now, chapter 5, we talk about communing with the Lord. Chapter 5 begins with the new generation being circumcised. We learn that as soon as all the kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over, their heart melted. There was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. They knew that there was a force bigger than them that they were going to contend with, and that they didn't really have much of a chance. It's like saying didn't have a Chinaman's chance to overcome. Verse 2, we learn, at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make a flint knife, circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. Joshua made flint knives, circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Haaraloth. And this is the reason why. Here's why. All the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way after they'd come out of Egypt. Why? Because they had disobeyed God. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people who were born on the way in the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the people of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nations, the men of war who came out of Egypt, perished, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, and the Lord swore to them that they would not be allowed to see the land that the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their children whom he raised up in their place that Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. When the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their place in the camp until they healed. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. And so the name of that place is called Gilgal, he says, to this day. Now, one thing they hadn't been doing, they had not been observing the Passover. This is the first time the Passover is going to be observed in Canaan. They've been instructed on how to observe the Passover. So the people of Israel were encamped at Gilgal. They kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening. Of course, this is the first month, and that's when the Passover is kept. On the plains of Jericho, the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land. Again, fulfilling the prophecy of eating what they had not planted. Eating parched grain, unleavened cakes. The manna ceased. They no longer needed the manna. So God caused it to cease. Now they could eat off the land. They didn't need God to provide the food for them. There was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. And then we come to a very interesting encounter. Joshua was by Jericho. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there is a man standing before him with a sword drawn in his hand. Joshua went to him and he said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, I'm not for either, no. But I am the commander of the Lord. Now I have come." Joshua fell on his face to the earth, worship him. Now notice, this man does not refuse worship. Remember John, when he fell in worship, they told him, "Stand up. You worship God. You don't worship man. Don't worship anyone but God. Don't worship angels. You don't worship man." This commander of the Lord's army did not refuse worship. Therefore, I believe this is the work of Christ in the Old Testament pre-incarnate, before he ever was incarnated into the body of Jesus. This was prior to his being Jesus. So he worshiped him, no refusal of the worship. And he says to him, "What does my Lord," there is my owner, my master, "say to his servant?" Here's the answer. Here's the only thing he said to him. The commander of the Lord's army said to him, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Interesting encounter. An encounter of Christ in the Old Testament. I believe Abraham also had an encounter with Christ. Lot had an encounter. We see that in those, and we've studied that before. You can go back and watch those lessons. Exodus, when we get them up there, that will definitely be up there. Genesis and Exodus, you will see in those lessons what we're talking about. Next week, we want to talk about conquest of Jericho, and then we'll look at the battle at Ai. We'll look at Achan, how he almost cost Israel dearly in his coveting and his selfishness, taking a Babylonian garment he saw. And we'll study that in detail. Now, if you found this video to be helpful and want to learn more, be sure you download the note card that goes with these lessons, if we have one here yet. And also write or download our free Bible correspondence course. You'll find the links to each in the description below. We here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ want to help you with your growth in the knowledge of God's Word. Remember, we are in it for the likes and the subs, so be sure you subscribe. And with that, thanks for watching or listening. In the meantime, in between time, we'll see you next time. Cheerio, mate. Bob's your uncle.